The file that I have loaded here, just some basic geometry. It's the cross section of the previous part file that we've been playing around with. Let's say that you have some geometry, doesn't matter whether this is the mill side or the lathe side, but you have some geometry you want to use for future reference. Maybe you have an API thread that you like the way that it's designed. You want to be able to go in there, select angles, or even on the mill side you have a bolt pattern that you want to import into another file. Maybe this is a connection to an air hose of some sort or some kind of pressurized connection. We could take this geometry and actually add it to another file. So by using the save sum function found under files, I could select the geometry that I want to export, and you'll notice that I can export this out in many different ways. I can do it as a step file, a drawing. In this case, most likely it would be a drawing or a DXF of this wireframe. But if you have solids, you can also bring them out as that as well to use for future reference. Now, I'm sure most of y'all may have seen that option already, and typically in this class, or even in the Essentials class, whenever I'm going over this is something I bring up. What I also want to talk about is what happens when you have operations that you want to use for future reference as well. So in this case, let's start by going to the Machine tab. I want to go over to the Machine type group, drop down the gallery for Lathe, and I'm going to select that default lathe. Once your machine group is loaded for this lathe, of course I can always go in there and say stock setup. I can define my stock by 2 points, say here to there, and of course I remember it was 4 inches, right? But we're going to use the margins again. I'll say 0.1, 0.1, and I'll hit enter here. I'm not going to worry about the chuck jaws setup. I want to focus more on importing in this particular operation that we can use. The very first thing you'll notice is inside of my tool manager here, I do not have any tools. And if I was to actually go back to my folder that I have my files in, I have this import file which we're going to be using. What I'd like to talk about is inside of the tool manager, if I right click, you also have the import option here. And I can go find the file. If I say remember this file, it's going to remember this location where it resides at. But there's also another way to do this, which is my preference. I can hold down my left click and I can drag that file right there into my tool manager. And it will automatically select the location. I got remember this file, and I could select anything I want within this operation. So in this case I can say I want to do a face operation. I don't have a tailstock loaded, but if I did, I can grab that. I can grab a rough can cycle and finish operations as well. I can plunge turn. I can do anything I want to do here. I'll just say we'll bring in those operations, and I'm holding down control as I select them. You can see the green check mark on them. It's going to tell me they've been imported successfully. I can say OK and X out. If I go to my lathe tool manager, I can now see these tools have also came in as well. And if I was to go back to my lathe face operation, I can see everything came in from the previous operation. I can simply green check OK, and I got a face operation. Now what you also notice is the face operation didn't require any geometry because it already has a Z0 that you're selecting. The can cycles for the rough here, on the other hand, do. And you'll notice that I have my 3D tool here, as well as my V&MG for the 2D tool. What I want to do is select my geometry first, and I could do that by selecting the geometry group, or the geometry option there under this rough can cycle. I can right click here and I can add a chain. And I can tell it that I want to machine everything within this area. From here, I'm going to open up my parameters and I'm going to go ahead and select my VNMG. I'm going to tell it this is a rough OD type 2. And if you don't know what a type 2 rough operation is, before I said a type 1 rough operation constantly climbs up going back. A type 2 operation will actually allow you to dive off into cavities and climb back up. And the difference on the two operations output wise you will see is how you approach your part. For now, I'm not going to worry about the output. We're going to discuss some more of these parameters here. And I'm going to look at the plunge parameter. I'm going to allow it to dig down into that area. But I also want to extend my lead out for this particular geometry. And in this case, I could do a distance between 2 points. I could say here to there. Maybe make it a nice round number. 1.5, and I can green check OK. And green check OK again. Inside of my parameters here, you notice that I have that extend contour to stock. So we are reading towards the very top. This allows our retract to come back up towards the top for that initial cut. Definitely want to make sure that I'm clearing everything. And then of course coming out here, digging down, and you see the final retract going back to the stock again. For my finish, you'll notice that this is a long hand cycle. I will have to select my chain, just as we did previously. I'll green check OK. But I also have a little bit more control over this particular operation. With the lead in, lead out, I can select to extend the start of the contour. And I can also select how I want to approach my part, which I'm leaving this by default. I do, on the other hand, want to extend. We've done it 1.5, so that looks good. I'm going to have a 45-degree retract off that OD. And of course, I need to make sure that my plunge parameters are set. And I can green check OK. Now, to be honest, the only thing I'm really doing in there is extending my contour here. Had this came from the very same connection and I was adding this connection to another part, I could simply select my geometry and regenerate. If I want to do my plunge turn, we'll make an example of this and I'll say add. And without doing anything, I'm simply going to regenerate this toolpath. And now you notice that I didn't do anything parameter-wise. I automatically brought the toolpath in and let it process the parameters just like I like them. For my drill operation, I'm not even going to select anything. I'm just going to, okay, let's see. What am I missing here? Drill, negative, and there we go. So I just went ahead and regenerated. I didn't mess with any parameters. I must have clicked on something a little off there. But this is a way that you can bring in these particular toolpaths and actually kind of fast pace your programming and assure yourself that the parameters from a previous toolpath are coming in and they're parameters that are safe, parameters that you like, and it makes things a little bit easier down the road.